Thanks so much for joining us. Nick with Pictureline here, your premier camera store. I am super excited to be chatting with Eric Stoner from Canon USA. Obviously, Canon has just had some pretty exciting announcements with their mirrorless lineup and the addition of several RF lenses and teleextenders. Eric, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you have a few minutes to answer a few questions and kind of address some of the exciting new developments that Canon has just dropped on the market.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having us. We really appreciate the time. And, with the announcements today, it's everybody is super excited. Obviously, a large group of people are excited about the cameras, but when we're adding 6 new lenses to the system in one day, that's a good amount of lenses that we can talk about and add to people's toolkit for their R series cameras. So we're excited.
Canon has been an absolute juggernaut when it comes to development of new mirrorless lenses. I've been very impressed with the speed and just the thoughtfulness behind the design that they're coming out with. It seems like they have a very good long-term strategy for supporting the mirrorless system, while still supporting legacy EF users and making sure the compatibility is still there for people that have a good collection of EF lenses.
Yeah, well, not only just compatibility, but it goes a step beyond that. And when we're talking about, bringing EF lenses into a new mirrorless system, it's not just compatibility, it's lossless compatibility. In other words, there's no loss in quality of what you would expect to get out of an EF lens simply because of a converter. There's a stigma out there that a converter, you're losing something with a converter, and that's just not the case with the 3 Canon mount adapters that are available to go from EF and all the way to the EOS R system. So
awesome. Well, let's dive in. One of the lenses that I was definitely not expecting but was excited to see is the new 85 millimeter. What can you tell us about that lens compared to the existing offerings in the RF lineup?
Sure, right. Well, I think the new 85, the RF 85 f2 macro IS STM lens, that's the full name of the lens, is
the mouthful.
I know it becomes a mouthful, right? But every one of those items in the nomenclature has specific meaning for those of you that maybe are lens geeks and need to dive into just being able to know what a lens is about in the name. So what's in a name? Well, the first thing is the focal length. The 85 millimeter focal length has long been a tried and true focal length for the portrait photographer, wedding photographer, event photographer, studio photographer. It's a great focal length because of the working distance you have with your subject, where there's easy communication between the photographer and the subject that you're working with, rather than being so far away with a telephoto lens that it becomes more difficult. So that's the first thing. This lens is extremely sharp. Now, I want to be very clear when I say that it's not an L series lens,
Okay.
but in my testing with the lens, I had a day to come out and shoot almost a full day with one of our models, and part of the presentation that mainly a lot of your customers probably saw today on this lens at the virtual press conference were shot with that lens, and it is a joy to work with, and for a lot of reasons. I'm just going to share with you the size difference between the 85 millimeter f1.2 L series lens and this new 85 millimeter lens. So I'll just put them up side by side so you can see the difference in size.
That's going to be my next question. Oh, wow.
Right. So while the 85 f1.2 lens is an amazing lens, it's not for everybody, and we know that. Not only from a size and weight perspective, but the actual cost of the lens. It's not a cheap lens, and neither is this new lens either. However, when I say cheap, I'm not referring to construction and things like that. But when we're talking about price of the lens, yeah, exactly. We're talking about a lens that is going to satisfy the needs of a large group of photographers, from amateur all the way through to the working professional, that maybe perhaps has other lenses that they're investing in, and they love that 85 millimeter prime focal length, but they can't justify the price for the 1.2. And I understand that. So this lens is coming in at a really, really great price. And you know, one of the great things I think about this well, there's several things. Number one, 5 stops of image stabilization. And as we're talking about event photographers, and Rudy had made mention when he was talking about the R6 being almost a perfect wedding camera. This is almost a perfect wedding lens when we're talking about prime focal length portrait style shooting. With 5 stops of image stabilization, you can combine that image stabilization. There's 5 stops in the lens, and then the IBIS, or in-body image stabilization, in the camera. Those two styles of image stabilization can be combined into you know, really stabilizing an image. Now, just be clear, obviously, we're talking about image stabilization. It's not going to help freeze your subject movement. It is just for you know, any kind of camera vibrations and you know, photographer movement, things like that. So just to be clear, but when we're talking about low light photography, diving down into those real dim lit churches or intimate moments where the lighting is very dim, candle light, for example, this lens with the bright f2 aperture is going to just fit right into those categories situationally. And the other great thing that I think is great about this lens is its macro capability down to half life size. And so for a photographer that's running and gunning and doing events, you can go right from a full-length portrait up to do those close details at half life size. Now we're talking about close focusing to a pretty close number of, I believe, my memory serves me correctly, I'm drawing a blank on the actual minimum focus, but I'll get to you in a second with that. Sure. But it's just a joy to work with. Now there is on the lens, there is a focus range limiter as well. So if you don't perhaps want the lens to be able to hunt back and forth. Now again, as Rudy explained with the R5 and R6, with the focusing system that's available on these cameras, having the lens jump off of a subject is not anywhere near as prevalent as it used to be. Yeah. So you know, especially when we're talking about the eye detect and face and head detect and body detection, it's just amazing how these cameras will lock on a subject and just stick with it. So 1.15 feet is the minimum focus on the 85-1 or the 85-2 that we're talking about here. So that allows the photographer.
Pretty great for an 85.
It was on the hard drive. It just had to come around. But yeah, so it allows the photographer, that run and gun photographer that maybe doesn't have time to switch lenses, to get in there, get those quick details that they need for the album or what have you, and get right back out into work. You know, yes, of course, zoom lenses offer a greater deal of flexibility, but there's a large amount of photographers that really enjoy and exclusively use prime lenses. And this is going to be a great lens for that group of photographers. I'm really excited about it overall. You know, it's opening up the door for people to get into an affordable, really well designed and sharp lens.
Well, it's certainly nice from a size and weight standpoint too. I mean, that is a very compact lens. I'm excited to see that. Speaking of the image stabilization, you mentioned that they work in conjunction with the in-body stabilization. What kind of combination? You mentioned the lens is a 5-stop image stabilizer. When those are combined, what's our net effect, and what kind of speeds are you seeing people? Obviously, it'll vary from person to person, but what kind of speeds are you hearing from people that have tested this that they're able to handhold that.
Right. Well, I mean, we'll start hearing more once the lens hits the street. But you know, internally, our test, you know, theoretically, in a controlled environment, obviously, again, as you said, it really depends on the user and because everybody's different with the amount of movement that they have when they're shooting.
How much coffee you've had in the morning.
Exactly. Yeah. Are we shooting in the morning when the coffee's still in your bloodstream or not? So it's going to depend. And it also depends, and it's called coordinated IS or image stabilization. And
Okay.
it really depends on the lens itself. You know, there's 6, you know, well, with the exception of the 2 teleconverters we're going to announce, there's really 4 lenses that you could just obviously standalone lenses that we're talking about. But and it's going to be a little different, the amount of coordinated stabilization that each of those lenses will provide. But you with the understanding that, you know, 5 stops of image stabilization, optical image stabilization in this lens, combined with in-body, you're going to get over 5 stops. I don't know that Canon Inc. is going to broadcast an absolute number because it's very
Sure.
user dependent on, you know, giving exact numbers of what you could expect to see. You know, for instance, you know, if we were to say, well, it has 8 stops of image stabilization, well, somebody's going to say, well, I could take it down to 4 seconds and get a sharp shot. Well, no, that's not really exactly true. So it's very user dependent, but
Sure.
but we this is groundbreaking for Canon in that, you know, we've been doing image stabilization for a long time, and these are the first 2 cameras that have in-body image stabilization, and certainly we're not the first ones to do that, but having the coordinated effect between the lens and the body is a first, and that's something I think that users are really going to sit nicely with.
Now, is that coordinated stabilization going to be exclusive to the RF lenses, or is that something, if you have a legacy EF lens that you're using with the RF to or EF to RF adapter, you can also take advantage of?
So good question. Yes. So you do get some level of image stabilization, coordinated image stabilization between EF lenses and the new R6 and R5 bodies. However, where the magic really starts happening is when you mount an RF lens on those 2 bodies at this point, and that's where you really see a ramp up in the image stabilization as a whole. So that's, you know, kind of a benefit to switching over to the RF line of glass, and now we've got enough lenses in the system for you know, the trinity of lenses that many people talk about, having those 3, like the 15 to 35, the, you know, the 24 to 70, and the 70 to 200. Those 3
Sure.
make up a large portion of what most event photographers are going to carry in their bag. But then they start adding lenses like the 85 and maybe some of the other lenses we'll be talking about. But and I don't want to just sit here and talk to the professional photographer, because this 85 millimeter and some of the other ones we're going to talk about aren't mutually exclusive to those photographers. So
Sure. Well, I know, you know, you mentioned the, you know, kind of the Trinity lenses that are so popular for photographers really in every industry. And I've had a lot of people that have been asking about, well, when are they coming out with a new 100-400? And I guess we have the answer, and it's not a 100-400, but a 100-500.
yeah, yeah, got it right here.
Super exciting lens.
Yeah, this is a great addition to the Canon system for a lot of reasons. And you know, the first one that a lot of people are going to kind of resonate with is the landscape and wildlife photographer. But it goes beyond that, really. The 100 to 500, this is an f4.5 to 7.1 IS USM L series lens. And the performance of this lens is, and those who have shot with the EF 100 to 400 know what a great lens that is. This lens is as equal to or better in quality than the EF 100 to 400 version 2. So quality-wise,
Wow.
I don't think anybody has anything to worry about. Now, you consider the fact that the optical system of the EOS R system, the RF lenses, are kind of at the heart of the entire system. Uh, Bodies are going to come and go. As you know, lenses they have a much longer life than a
Sure.
camera body does. And the entire system is built around the optics. And what we know about the new optical designs and what the engineers at Canon Inc. have with this system is the ability to design lenses that they haven't really been able to do before. Evidence of that was with the initial announcement with the 28 to 70 f2. And that's just scratching the surface of what's capable for the engineers to design and actually bring to fruition. So I'm excited to see where we go with this. But back to the 100 to 400, do you have questions you want to ask me or specifically, or do you want me to kind of go through some
How
of the
would you
highlights?
say, yeah, how would you say it compares, like, you mentioned the 100 to 400, it's as sharp, sharper. How is the autofocus speed? Like
Great.
if the 100 to 400 is kind of the benchmark that people are comparing it against, what
Yeah,
pushes them towards the 1 to 5?
as I mentioned, it's as sharp or sharper than the
Okay.
EF 100 to 400, version 2. A couple other things of note, in fact, more than a couple. Obviously, the focal length, you get an extra 100 millimeters with this lens over the 100 to 400. That's number one. It's about a half-pound lighter than the 100 to 400 EF version. So that's a nice little bonus right there
Yeah,
for
for
those
sure.
that are going to be, holding it up handheld all the time or just carrying around in your bag. So that's a half pound to half a pound when you're walking
Sure.
around all day and holding it. It does, save you a little bit there. Um, 5 stops of image stabilization in this lens versus 4 in the 100 to 400. So we get an extra stop there, plus the combination of, coordinated IS between body and lens with the R5 and the R6. Now, with the EOS R, the original, obviously that doesn't have in-body stabilization, so you're getting the 5 stops of image stabilization optically with the lens. One of the really great things I think about this lens is its close focusing ability. Now, it's not a macro lens, but at 100 millimeters, it's got a just shy of 3 feet, which is okay. That's great. But where it really sings is going to the 500 millimeter mark, and at a close focusing distance of 3.94 feet, just shy of 4 feet at 500
Oh,
millimeters.
wow.
That's impressive. So photographers, I'll give you an example. So if you're a photographer, nature photographer, and you're trying to photograph maybe butterflies that are a little skittish and they don't like you getting very close to them, this lens is going to really rock as far as keeping a good working distance away from the butterfly, and getting razor sharp images with this lens. So I'm super excited about that part of it. Now, the focusing on this lens is virtually silent. It's powered by 2 nano USM focusing motors, and quite frankly, when you put this in video mode, you could physically use the internal microphone, and that's really where you hear focusing noise. When you go to an external microphone, you don't hear that nearly as much. But the kind of the benchmark for testing lens noise is using the internal microphone, and I got to tell you,
Sure.
this lens is virtually silent. And not only is it silent, but it is super smooth, silky smooth in its focusing. So that really brings, I think, that's a big win for videographers that are looking to obviously minimize the noise, audible noise from a lens. It's just an amazing piece. Part of the quality that is built into this lens, there are 7 UD or ultra low dispersion lens elements in it, and that's quite a few. With the 6 UD and 1 super UD lens element. Now, I won't go into all the details of the nitty gritty and the weeds with what that means, but the bottom line is those elements are designed to help reduce chromatic aberrations or color fringing. And
Okay.
the end of the game here is that you end up with superior image quality. That's what most people need to know.
Yeah.
It's really a fine lens.
It looks like a very exciting lens. Again, it's going to be a hard wait to get my hands on one of those and run it through its paces. Let's talk a little bit about the new 600 and 800 millimeter lenses. These are lenses that are very intriguing on paper. What can you tell us about the design on these lenses that makes them unique and kind of special in the RF lens lineup?
Right. Well, I'll take it a step further and say they're more than exciting on paper. I guess from when we were, if you were looking at the rumor sites, yes, on paper, you look at specs and, we don't live our lives in a world of specs. We live in reality, and the reality is that these lenses, and I'll go into a lot of different aspects of the lenses in a moment, but on its own, these lenses are going to solve the needs for a lot of photographers looking to get into super telephoto photography, but can't afford the $13,000 that it takes to invest in, say, for instance, a 600 millimeter f4 or an 800 millimeter f5.6 on the EF side of things. So
sure.
One of the big things about the reason why I think this is my assumption that we weren't told this, but you can put two and two together and figure it out. That's a big market place where the average budding photographer or just casual amateur wants to get into super telephoto photography, but just doesn't have the means. Like, going to your wife or your husband and saying, "Look, honey, I'm
going to buy a car, but I'm going to use it on my camera."
Exactly. It's not realistic for a lot of people, and we understand that. So these lenses are really fit for those people. Let's get one thing clear. They are not designed for or targeted for the professional.
Okay.
That's clear in looking at the specs of the lens. Now, speaking of that, it's an f11 lens. It's a constant aperture f11. You cannot change the aperture on the lens. Now,
okay.
These lenses fall under the category of DO, or diffractive optics lenses. Currently in the system, there are two diffractive optics lenses. There's a 70-300, which is quite a bit older lens, and then we have a version 2 of the 400 millimeter f4 DO. And the whole goal of diffractive optics is to be able to lighten the load, number one, substantially by using diffractive optics technology. And secondly, lessening the footprint or making the whole lens much smaller so you can fit it into a bag that you wouldn't have been able to fit, let's say, for instance, the 400 millimeter f2.8, or the 600 millimeter f4. You need a case in and of itself for lenses like that, the super telephoto, the big white lenses. Now, these lenses have a really unique, and I'll talk about diffractive optics in a moment a little bit more in detail, but the really cool thing about these lenses is their ability to compact for storing. This is the 600 millimeter. I hope you can see that in focus. Now, it's a light lens. I'll talk about weight here in a moment, but one of the cool things is that this ring on the lens is a locking ring, and this allows me to extend the lens out into its shooting position and then lock it in place. If the lock's not in place, the camera will know, and it will say to you on the LCD screen, you need to lock the lens into the shooting position. So it's a smart system. But let's just talk about weight for a moment. The 600 millimeter lens, the f4L series lens, comparative to this lens, you're saving 4.67 pounds on that. Now, the version 3 of the 600 f4L was substantially lighter than the version 2. So that was a big deal from there. But if we compare it to the version 2 lens, it's even greater. But where the 800 millimeter lens, you're saving 7.14 pounds from that lens to this lens we're talking about now. And here
So
is
these are
the,
lenses that are intended to be handheld, not necessarily require a tripod or a monopod.
exactly. So while we understand that the more you get up there into that super telephoto focal length, uh, it's really critical to stabilize the camera and lens, of course. They are very hand-holdable. We
Okay.
understand that it's an f11 aperture, so there's a couple of, you know, items you need to be concerned about. One, we need to make sure we're not shooting in dim lighting conditions. We're talking about an f11 lens. We understand that it's going to require some light, you know, daylight to get into the sensor and be able to, you know, have shutter speeds that you can reasonably handhold. So we understand
Sure.
that. But there's 5 stops of image stabilization with the 600 millimeter f11 lens and 4 stops with the 800. Now,
Okay.
speaking of IS, I want to be very clear on this, that the 800 and the 600 are not capable, for technical reasons, of the coordinated IS that we were talking about earlier.
Oh,
Unfortunately,
okay.
they are not combinable or using that coordinated IS. So, but in and of
Good to know.
itself, the big benefit of this obviously is the size and weight reduction for those focal lengths. And that's going to suit a lot of casual users that are looking to get into wildlife photography, even sports for that matter. Obviously, you know, we need to be concerned about, you know, faster shutter speeds with sports. So higher ISO in a lot of cases is going to be the name of the game. We understand that too. But those types of things, you know, Canon cameras handle really, really well. So it's not a big deal, I think. But there's there's give and take. You know, do you want to spend 13,000 or do you want to come in at a really reasonable price and be able to do this and just know full well knowing when the conditions that should be present for you to be shooting with.
Well, it certainly sounds like with these new models, the R5 and the R6, that the processing capabilities at high ISO is going to minimize that kind of trade-off that we're kind of used to right now.
Absolutely. If I may, I'll just give a quick little brief talk about diffractive optics.
Oh, please, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So diffractive optics, for those of you that don't know, it's a technology that Canon developed a number of years ago with the original 400 millimeter f4DO and the 70 to 300, as I mentioned. If you're familiar with what a Fresnel lens is, or if you've seen them in theatrical performances, the spotlights, they have those concentric circles in the lenses. Now, that's not quite exactly the way these lenses are developed, but it's on that same idea of a Fresnel lens. And one of the big benefits of Fresnel lenses is that it allows us to put less lens elements in the actual lens itself, thereby lightening the weight. And of course, the footprint can be much smaller as well, as I already mentioned. Now, one of the great things about Fresnel or DO optics is that they virtually eliminate chromatic aberration. So in that regard, you don't have to worry anywhere near as much about that as you would on another standard typical lens that you know, any other type lens other than DO.
Sure.
So otherwise known as refractive optics, which are standard type lenses. And now there are a couple of things you need to be worried about.
I was just going to say, are there any trade-offs that we need to be
there's
aware of?
always, yeah, there's always a trade-off, and it's not a. I think if you're aware of this, it's not as big a deal. But the lenses, because of the diffractive optics design, with those concentric circles in the optics. Now, one thing you have to be concerned about is flaring. And when you have specular highlights or backlight coming in from your subject into the lens, it is possible to get flare. It doesn't always happen. You may see this aqua-colored type of a flare that may be appearing in the picture. That is not a malfunction of the lens. You don't have a bad lens. It's just a natural occurrence when we're talking about diffractive optics lens. One of the things I also want to be very clear about with a diffractive optics lens, for that matter, any super telephoto lens, is when a photographer is shooting, especially in the warmer months, but it does obviously happen in cooler environments as well, is heat wave distortion. And that's basically heat rising up from the ground. And if you've ever photographed on a football field, you know, in summer training camp or in a warm environment, you've seen heat rising off of the field, and it's sometimes impossible to get a sharp picture because of the heat distortion. And that has, again, nothing to do with the quality of the lens. That you could get that on the best quality lens on Earth, but that's just something to be aware of when, you know, and I mention this because photographers that maybe perhaps haven't worked with this kind of focal length before in that super telephoto range.
Something they're not used to seeing.
Exactly. They're not going to be used to seeing it, and they're going to think this is not right. And I want to avoid having them come into you and say to you guys that I have a defective lens. No, that's just a atmospheric condition that is susceptible to any shooting condition. So just need to be aware of that. But
now in regards to the lens, in regards to the lens flare, did the 600 and 800 come with a lens hood that would help to kind of minimize that, or is that an optional add-on, or is there anything that users can do to kind of prevent that?
I don't think the lenses come with a lens hood, but
okay.
I reserve the right to correct myself on that one. We'll see, though. Okay. I'll try to get back to you on it.
Okay.
But yeah,
awesome.
So I'm excited about these lenses for the photographer that wants to get into this and just simply couldn't A, afford it, or B, be able to carry around that kind of weight that's required with the other two lenses I mentioned, the 800 millimeter f5.6 EF and the 600 millimeter f4 lenses. So it's opening up the door for a lot of people to get into super telephoto photography. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, awesome. So tell me about the new RF extenders. I know there's a 1.4 and a 2x.
Sure.
Are we safe to assume that kind of the difference in image quality that we're used to with the EF extenders carries over to the RF extenders, or are these performing a little bit differently than we're used to?
Well, so as you've heard me already mention about the optics story with the RF optics being, you know, that's the center, the heartbeat, if you will, of this whole system. The teleextenders are no exception. These two teleextenders obviously are very similar in nature to the EF counterparts, with the 1.4 having one stop of light loss and the 2X having 2 stops of light loss. They are both compatible right now with just the lenses we're talking about today. But these two teleextenders are of L series quality, like the other two in the EF line, and the quality of these is centered around getting sharp focus. Now, yes, there are microprocessors built into these lenses, and the optical design of these lenses is very interesting. That inside the lens, they've reduced and almost eliminated on specifically 3 of the lens elements, the space between the lens elements, where you could introduce the opportunity for flare and ghosting as light bounces around inside. So whenever you put a teleextender on the camera, yes, there is a slight drop in quality loss because you're adding as something that wasn't native to the original master lens, right?
Sure.
But one thing I will say is that, yes, autofocus will slow down slightly when you use these for the advantage of sharp focus. I'd much rather have a sharp image and have the AF slow down just slightly than have an out of focus image that I'm not going to be able to use anyway. Sure. But the quality of these is in line with what the RF optics are all about. So, in fact, in a lot of cases, specifically using the 2X extender, and you know, that's something that you're going to see amazingly sharp images. And as far as compatibility goes, and I was talking about this before, I think I lost your video feed there. The compatibility is with the 3 lenses we've announced today: the 100 to 500 and the 600 and the 800.
Okay.
I want to mention very clearly that the teleextenders are not compatible with the 70 to 200 f2.8 RF
That was
lens.
going to be my next question. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Okay.
the reason why is, and part of it, well, a lot of it has to do with that lens design, the 70 to 200, was designed to be smaller than a traditional 70 to 200, like the EF version, the 2.8 version. And I
Sure.
think the benefit of that far outweighs compatibility with teleextenders, because you obviously can fit that lens in a much smaller area in your bag, and you can travel a lot easier with it than having the ability to just use it with a teleextender. So that's the reason for that. On the 100 to 500, the zoom range is limited when you have these teleextenders mounted on the lens from 300 to 500 for the very same reason. The optics in the lens do shift back and forth, and when they're at below the 300 millimeter range, the optics sit too far back that they would interfere with this part of the teleextender right here, the part that the optics cut out. So for that reason, it will stop at 300. Now, it's not hitting the optics. There's a physical stop in the lens that will prevent you from moving back any further and damaging the lens, both the extender and the lens, the 100 to 500.
It's
but
got
just
a
know
safeguard in there to protect
there
it
is a
from me, is
safeguard.
what
Yeah,
you're saying.
it's a physical stop. But know this, that when you're putting on a teleextender, the goal is maximum magnification. So I don't see this as being a problem at all, because in most cases, you're going to be out somewhere between 300 and 500 millimeters anyway.
Sure.
Just by the mere nature of putting the extender on, you want that to get closer to your subject. So that doesn't really seem to me to be a big deal. They are slightly heavier, just an ounce on the 1.4 compared to the EF version, and an ounce and a half, I think, or roughly an ounce and a half on the 2X.
Okay.
Because, again, the optics in there, that would be the reason why. It's just a little heavier. Now, again, L-series construction on these, and that goes for, dust and water resistance. They're gasketed and sealed, and of course, then the newer coatings they're putting on the exterior of the lens has a heat shield on it as well. So that's kind of the lowdown on the teleextenders.